There comes a moment in every awakening when the concept of love collapses. Not because love dies, but because everything that wasn't truly love begins to fall apart. The love you once gave so freely, yet so fearfully, starts to dissolve. You begin to see how much of what you called love was a silent bargain, a contract written in invisible ink, an exchange between wounds. You thought love meant giving yourself away, but awakening teaches you that love, when born from need, isn't love, it's dependency dressed in devotion. Before awakening, love often lived inside the ego's architecture. It was built on the fragile foundation of if they choose me, if they stay, if they see my worth, you loved as long as you were loved back. You gave as long as you were appreciated. You stayed as long as your heart was safe. That is conditional love. A love that survives only in agreement, not in truth. It's a love that measures, calculates, and negotiates. It's love with strings attached to validation, attention, and approval. But when you awaken, something radical happens. The illusion cracks. The heart no longer finds peace in being needed. It begins to crave authenticity. You start recognizing the silent manipulation that used to disguise itself as care. You see how often you used love to control, to heal, to change, or to earn something you didn't give yourself. You remember all the times you gave too much, not because your soul overflowed, but because your emptiness demanded to be filled. You begin to understand that love born from fear cannot be sacred. Awakening reveals that love, in its purest form, is not about ownership or expectation. It doesn't cling, it doesn't demand, it doesn't keep score. True love exists beyond transaction. It flows from a heart that has already met itself. And so, you begin to unlearn the patterns of emotional trade. You stop asking, who will love me? And start asking, how deeply can I love without fear? In this stage, there is grief. The ego mourns the death of its favorite illusion that love must be earned. You feel disoriented because the ways you once connected no longer fit. The intensity, the chase, the endless need for reassurance, they start to feel hollow. People around you may notice the shift. You may no longer react the way you used to. You stop participating in games of guilt, manipulation, or emotional rescue. You stop needing to be the hero or the victim. Instead, you begin to honor yourself as a sovereign being, complete and whole, no longer seeking completion in another. This death of conditional love is not a rejection of others. It's a resurrection of your own soul. It's the quiet recognition that the love you give must come from fullness, not lack. It's understanding that no one is responsible for your peace, your happiness, or your healing. You begin to see that true love doesn't start with finding the right person. It begins with becoming the right presence. When you stop loving conditionally, you stop fearing loss. You no longer cling because you understand that what is real cannot be taken away. You no longer try to convince, chase, or prove your worth because you know your worth is not up for negotiation. You realize that those who are aligned with your vibration of truth will meet you naturally without force. And those who leave were never meant to stay in your next chapter. This kind of love is not passive or detached. It is fierce in its purity. It allows freedom. It celebrates individuality. It trusts the flow of life rather than resisting it. You begin to love not because you are promised something in return, but because love itself is your natural expression. It becomes less about who receives it and more about the beauty of the giving. As this transformation deepens, you might find that your relationships evolve or even dissolve. Those built on emotional dependency may fade. The ones rooted in authenticity will expand. You start attracting souls who recognize your energy, who see you not as an object of desire, but as a reflection of consciousness itself. These connections are calmer, deeper, and more transparent. They do not demand that you shrink, perform, or pretend. They ask you only to be awake. The death of conditional love is not the end of connection. It's the beginning of sacred intimacy. It's the freedom to love without fear of rejection, to give without needing to be chosen, to care without losing yourself. It's love without currency, love without debt, love without conditions. It's the kind of love that doesn't bind, it liberates. It's not about falling in love, but rising into love. It's not about needing someone to complete your heart. It's about remembering that your heart was never incomplete to begin with. When awakening begins to unravel the layers of who you thought you were, something extraordinary happens to your relationships. They stop being places where you hide and start becoming mirrors that show you who you are. Every connection, every attraction, every conflict becomes a reflection. Love no longer feels like a movie to get lost in. It becomes a mirror that pulls you into awareness. You start to realize that the people who enter your life are not random. They are sacred messengers carrying pieces of your own unconscious self. Before awakening, relationships often serve as distractions from inner emptiness. You meet someone, feel a spark, and call it destiny, never realizing that what you are really drawn to is the reflection of your unhealed patterns. You're drawn to familiarity, not love. You fall in love with your projections, your fantasies, your desires disguised as another person. You love the mirror, not the reflection. But when consciousness expands, the illusion begins to crumble. You begin to see that the chemistry that once excited you was sometimes a collision between wounds, a dance between two egos trying to fill each other's voids. In conscious relationships, the focus shifts from possession to reflection. Instead of asking, how can this person make me happy? You begin to ask, what is this person showing me about myself? Every reaction becomes a clue. Every irritation becomes a teacher. Every heartbreak becomes a revelation. You see that your anger, jealousy, or pain isn't always caused by the other. It's awakened by them. They are mirrors showing you the parts of your shadow that are ready to be seen. The moment you stop blaming and start observing, love transforms into a spiritual practice. This kind of awareness changes everything. You no longer cling to others in the hope of being rescued. You no longer demand that they fix your loneliness or carry your pain. Instead, you honor them for revealing where you are still asleep. The person who triggers you becomes your spiritual ally, whether they know it or not. You begin to thank those who mirror your darkness, because without them, you would never meet your own depth. Every conflict becomes a doorway. Every misunderstanding becomes a mirror polished by friction. Conscious relationships don't promise eternal harmony. They demand authenticity. They invite you to stand naked in truth, without masks or roles. You can no longer perform the part of the savior, the victim, or the pleaser, because awakening makes pretense unbearable. You start craving honesty over comfort, connection over control. You speak what's real, even when it shakes the foundation of what's familiar. And in doing so, you create space for a love that breathes. a love that grows through awareness, not attachment. The mirror of a conscious relationship shows you your emotional patterns with precision. It reflects how you close off when you're afraid, how you seek control when you feel insecure, how you project your unmet needs onto others. The relationship becomes a meditation, a sacred mirror reflecting your evolution in real time. You begin to see that love isn't about changing the other person. It's about transforming your perception. The partner who frustrates you may simply be showing you the part of yourself that still resists surrender. The friend who withdraws may be reflecting the space where you withhold love from yourself. As this awareness deepens, you start to experience compassion. Not the pity of the ego, but the compassion that comes from recognition. You see yourself in others. You understand that everyone is fighting an inner battle. Everyone is carrying hidden wounds. Everyone is learning how to love. You no longer judge as quickly because you understand that every soul is both a teacher and a student in the same classroom of existence. The mirror no longer frightens you, it fascinates you. Conscious relationships are not about perfection. They are about presence. You begin to see beauty in the imperfections, the trembling honesty, the moments of silence, the raw vulnerability that used to scare you. You learn to stay when it's uncomfortable, not out of obligation, but because you see value in what the discomfort reveals. You realize that love deepens not when it's easy, but when it's truthful. And so you start loving differently. You no longer seek someone to complete you. You seek someone to grow with you. You no longer chase validation. You offer understanding. You no longer run from pain. You face it together as mirrors reflecting evolution. The relationship becomes a sacred ground for awakening itself. It's no longer about finding someone to make you feel safe, but about creating a space where both souls can awaken to their highest truth. In the mirror of conscious relationships, love ceases to be a possession and becomes a revelation. Every person you meet, every heart you touch, every connection that comes or goes, all of it becomes part of your awakening. Each mirror brings you closer to your essence. Each reflection draws you deeper into the mystery of who you truly are. There comes a moment in awakening when the veil of romance begins to dissolve, and the fantasy of love that once fueled your dreams no longer satisfies your soul. The illusion shatters quietly, not in bitterness, but in truth. You realize that so much of what the world calls love is a projection, a story your mind created to escape from the ache of its own incompleteness. The fairy tale collapses, not because love fails, but because consciousness demands something real. You begin to see that the version of love you once chased was never about connection. It was about escape. Before awakening, romance often feels like salvation. It is the promise of being seen, the fantasy of someone arriving to heal the wounds you couldn't touch yourself. It's the dream of two souls merging into one, or finding the missing piece. You are told that true love will make everything make sense, that when the right person arrives, the chaos inside you will quiet, so you build castles in the clouds of hope and expectation, mistaking emotional intoxication for divine connection. You fall in love, not with a person, but with the idea of being saved from your own emptiness. But awakening burns through illusion like fire through fog. Suddenly, what you called love begins to look like dependency. What you called destiny starts to resemble projection. The romantic illusion begins to crumble under the light of awareness. You start seeing how much of what you gave away in the name of love was rooted in fear. Fear of being alone, fear of not being chosen, fear of facing yourself. The realization is humbling. You never really wanted love. You wanted relief. You wanted to escape yourself through another. When you awaken, that kind of fantasy no longer satisfies you. The chemical rush of newness, the sweet intoxication of being desired, the emotional drama that once felt alive, all of it loses its flavor. You no longer crave intensity for the sake of distraction. You crave depth. You crave truth. You crave a connection that doesn't rely on illusion to stay alive. Romantic love begins to transform from possession to partnership, from escape to evolution. You no longer want someone to complete you. You want someone who meets you in consciousness. As the illusion fades, your understanding of love matures. You start to see that love is not about merging. It's about mirroring. It's not about losing yourself in another. It's about finding yourself through them. Love becomes less about what you get and more about what you become. You stop asking, who will make me happy? And start asking, who will help me grow? The myth of perfect compatibility dissolves into the reality of conscious compatibility. The meeting of two souls who honor truth more than comfort, evolution more than fantasy. In this awareness, relationships change. They become less dramatic but more sacred, less idealized but more authentic. You no longer demand perfection from the other person because you've stopped demanding it from yourself. You begin to accept that love isn't meant to be constant euphoria. It's meant to be honest reflection. The purpose of love is no longer to complete you, but to awaken you. Every disagreement, every trigger, every moment of silence becomes part of a deeper conversation between two souls learning to see themselves clearly. The end of romantic illusion also brings a certain grief. You mourn the death of the fairy tale. The sweet illusion that someone would come and make life effortless. But beneath that mourning is liberation. You no longer have to perform, to chase, to prove. You can finally breathe inside love. You begin to understand that real love doesn't come with the fireworks of fantasy. It arrives in the quiet recognition of presence. It's the stillness of being seen without pretense, of being held without demand. And in this clarity, you start to see beauty in imperfection. You see that the moments that truly define love are not grand gestures, but small acts of truth. The courage to listen, the humility to apologize, the willingness to grow. Love becomes less of a movie and more of a meditation. It's not about creating a perfect story, but about living with open eyes. It's about choosing awareness over illusion, even when awareness shatters the dream. When the romantic illusion ends, love becomes sacred. It is no longer a fantasy to chase, but a truth to embody. You stop falling in love and start rising in consciousness. You learn that the purpose of love is not eternal harmony, but mutual awakening. You no longer need to be rescued, because you have found the wholeness within yourself that no romance could ever give you. You no longer need a fairy tale to feel alive, because you have discovered that the real magic is awareness itself. The illusion ends, and what remains is love stripped of fantasy, pure, unfiltered, unpossessive, and profoundly real. When awakening unfolds, the heart begins to move in ways it never has before. It expands beyond the boundaries of personal desire and opens to something much larger than itself. Compassion stops being a concept and becomes an instinct, not born of obligation, but of recognition. You begin to see that every soul, no matter how lost, how cold, or how cruel, is simply acting out of its own pain. What once triggered you now teaches you. What once hurt you now humbles you. You begin to see life through the lens of understanding rather than judgment. Before awakening, compassion is often selective. You feel empathy toward those who are kind, those who align with your beliefs, those who make you feel safe. Your heart opens and closes based on conditions. Who deserves it? Who earns it? Who reflects your version of goodness? But awakening breaks those walls. It dissolves the illusion of separation that made compassion conditional. The same heart that once hardened in the face of betrayal begins to soften, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. You realize that to see the light in yourself, you must also learn to see it flickering, however faintly, in others. Compassion in its awakened form is not sentimental, it is deeply conscious. It does not deny darkness, it sees through it. You begin to recognize that people behave according to their level of awareness. Some are ruled by fear, others by trauma, others by patterns they cannot yet see. Instead of labeling them as villains, you begin to see them as mirrors of what remains unhealed in the collective human spirit. The moment you see through the lens of compassion, your world changes. The same situations that once enraged you now invite your stillness. The same people who once wounded you now awaken your capacity for grace. This expansion of compassion does not mean tolerating abuse or denying boundaries. It means holding awareness without hatred. It means understanding that forgiveness does not require reconciliation. It requires consciousness. You can walk away and still wish them healing. You can set limits and still send love. You can choose peace without choosing bitterness. Compassion becomes the middle path between naivety and resentment. A sacred balance that allows your heart to stay open without losing its strength. When compassion expands, you stop needing to prove your goodness. You stop performing kindness to be seen as virtuous. Compassion becomes natural, effortless, spontaneous. You speak softly, not because you are afraid, but because you understand the impact of words. You listen deeply, not because you seek to fix others, but because you value presence more than opinion. You begin to sense the invisible pain that people carry and respond not with advice, but with silence that heals. In this state, the lines between self and other start to blur. You feel joy in another's joy, pain in another's pain, not as sympathy, but as resonance. You see yourself in everyone, the confused child, the lonely elder, the angry stranger, the tired parent, the lost lover. The barriers that once separated you from the world begin to melt. You no longer look at people as problems to solve or enemies to overcome. You see them as travelers on the same road of awakening, each walking at their own pace, each carrying their own lessons. Compassion expands because the awakened heart knows suffering intimately. It remembers its own darkness, the nights of confusion, the seasons of loss, the mistakes made in blindness. And so it refuses to condemn others for being where it once was. Instead of judgment, there is quiet understanding. Instead of superiority, there is humility. Compassion grows not from moral perfection, but from the acceptance of imperfection in all things. As the heart expands, your relationships begin to shift. You no longer react to others out of ego. You respond from awareness. You recognize that every argument, every misunderstanding, every act of unkindness is a cry for love in disguise. You start to meet hostility with grounded calm, not because you are detached, but because you are deeply connected. Compassion gives you strength to stay present when others collapse, to stay kind when others close off, to stay truthful when others hide behind masks. You start to understand that compassion does not always look gentle. Sometimes it is firm, sometimes it is silent, sometimes it is walking away. But beneath every action is the same energy, the desire to end suffering rather than multiply it. Compassion becomes your inner compass. It guides your tone, your timing, your choices. It reminds you that love is not always comfort. Sometimes love is clarity. Through this expansion, your perception of humanity transforms. You stop seeing the world as divided between good and bad, right and wrong, us and them. You begin to see consciousness in motion, souls playing roles, learning lessons, seeking return. The same awareness that once separated now unites. Compassion becomes the bridge between awakening and the world, between silence and service, between understanding and action. It is the quiet power that turns pain into wisdom, wounds into teachers, and life itself into a meditation on love. There is a moment in awakening when the search begins to fade, the restless seeking for meaning, love and belonging begins to dissolve, and what remains is a stillness that feels both vast and familiar. It is the moment when you realize that what you've been searching for was never outside you. The longing for connection, the ache for completion, the desire to be seen, all of it was a reflection of one simple truth. You were never separate to begin with. The journey that felt like a path outward was always leading inward toward the remembrance of oneness. Before awakening, life is experienced through fragmentation. You live behind invisible walls of identity, constantly defining yourself through contrasts. This is me, that is not me. This is mine, that is yours. This is good, that is bad. The ego thrives on these divisions because it draws its sense of existence from difference. It tells stories about who you are, what you deserve, and where you belong. Yet beneath all those stories lies an unspoken fatigue, a deep spiritual homesickness. You try to belong to the world, to a person, to an idea, not realizing that you already belong to existence itself. The return to oneness begins when those walls start to crack. The roles, labels, and identities that once gave you structure start to feel heavy. The separation that once defined you begins to hurt. You notice how much energy is spent protecting a self that doesn't truly exist. You begin to question the boundaries you built between yourself and others, between you and nature, you and God, you and love. Slowly, you start to sense the invisible thread connecting everything. The same breath that fills your lungs fills the trees, the oceans, the stars. The same life force that animates your heart moves through every living being. You start to feel what words can't capture, the quiet hum of unity behind all form. This realization doesn't arrive as an idea, it unfolds as an experience. Sometimes it comes through silence, sometimes through heartbreak, sometimes through stillness so profound that even thought pauses. You begin to see that the world is not something happening to you. It is happening as you. The faces you meet are reflections of the same consciousness wearing different expressions. The love you give and the love you receive are not two separate acts. They are one movement of energy flowing through different forms. The return to oneness changes how you relate to everything. You stop worshipping opposites like success and failure, right and wrong, light and dark. You start to see their dance, their interdependence, You recognize that without contrast, nothing could exist. The dualities of life, pain and pleasure, birth and death, gain and loss, are no longer enemies, but partners in creation. This realization softens your heart. You begin to live without resistance, flowing with what is, instead of clinging to what should be. You stop fighting life and start witnessing it. In this awareness, compassion deepens. You no longer see humanity as broken, but as evolving. You no longer see yourself as separate from the collective struggle. When you look into another's eyes, you see yourself looking back. Every act of kindness becomes an act of remembering. Every moment of silence becomes a prayer of unity. The boundaries of you and me begin to blur until only presence remains, an awareness vast enough to hold both shadow and light without judgment. The return to oneness is not an escape from individuality, but a transformation of perception. You still live, speak love, and act, but now with the understanding that these movements are expressions of something infinite. You realize that there was never a you who needed to awaken. There was only consciousness awakening to itself through the experience of being you. The universe is not separate from your awareness. Your awareness is the universe seeing itself. As this realization deepens, the old fears begin to dissolve. Fear of death fades, for you see there is no death, only transformation. Fear of loss diminishes, for you see that nothing can truly be lost when all is one. Even fear of loneliness softens, for how can you be alone when every heartbeat echoes through eternity? You begin to walk through life lighter, freer, less burdened by desire or resistance. You no longer need to control the flow of life, because you are the flow. The return to oneness brings a profound humility. You see that every person, every event, every breath is sacred. You no longer place yourself above or below anything. The trees become your teachers, the silence your sanctuary, the present moment your only home. You begin to live in harmony with the natural rhythm of existence, allowing everything to be exactly as it is. This state is not about detachment or transcendence. It is about intimacy with all that exists. It is the quiet knowing that the divine was never elsewhere, never distant, never apart from you. It was here, breathing through your every experience, waiting for you to remember that you were never separate, only asleep to your own infinite nature